He was the king of New York real estate. She was the ex-wife he'd erased. A temporary scaffolding he'd torn down. At his own lavish gala, Richard Thorne laughed, a champagne flute in hand, and told the entire city she'd be forgotten. He was wrong. Because while he was busy building his empire of glass and steel, he never saw the man watching from the shadows. A billionaire who was about to change the skyline itself. And that man had just one person in mind to help him, the one woman Richard swore the world would never, ever remember. The air at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Denver was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual Thorne Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York City's philanthropic calendar. And tonight it was also a coronation. Leora Harris stood in the shadows of a towering Egyptian column, her simple midnight blue gown a stark contrast to the glittering sequins and diamonds that surrounded her. This was her last official duty as Mrs. Thorne. The divorce papers were signed, the settlement a paltry, insulting fraction of the empire she had helped build. Richard Thorne, her ex-husband, was at the center of the room, of course. He was a lion of a man with a predator's smile and a mane of perfectly silvered hair. He was born into wealth but had a street fighter's instinct for acquisition, and he'd acquired a new fiancée, Isabella Vance. Isabella was a decade younger than Leora, a new model, as the Page Six columnists had gleefully called her. She was the daughter of a rival real estate family, making their union less a marriage and more a merger. Leora just had to get through the night. She'd promised her name on the gala's organizing committee, a commitment she'd made a year ago in a different life. Now she just wanted to disappear. And I have to thank my incredible partner. Richard's voice boomed from the stage, silencing the crowd. He raised his glass to Isabella, who glowed beside him. Isabella has shown me what a true partnership looks like. Building a legacy isn't just about blueprints. It's about vision. It's about a future. Leora felt the familiar cold twist in her stomach. That was her word. Vision. You see, Richard continued, his voice dripping with condescending charm, in this business, you learn a lot about structure. Some people are architects destined to design the future, and others. He paused, sweeping his gaze across the room, and for one sickening moment his eyes seemed to find Leora's in the darkness. Others are just temporary scaffolding, useful for a time perhaps, but ultimately designed to be torn down and forgotten. To the future. To the future, the crowd roared back. The glass in Leora's hand trembled. Scaffolding. He hadn't just divorced her. He had demolished her. The words were a public execution. He was telling his world, their world, that she was nothing. A temporary footnote to his great man story. She turned her movement stiff and walked away from the light. She slipped out the massive glass doors into the humid New York night, the applause for Richard and Isabella ringing in her ears. The life she had known, the Park Avenue apartment, the studio she'd been allowed to keep as a hobby, the pretense of being a partner, was gone. Richard wasn't just wrong. He was a liar. She wasn't scaffolding. She had been the goddamn foundation. Leora Harris had been a brilliant architect, top of her class at MIT. She specialized in sustainable, community-focused urban design. Then she met Richard Thorne. He'd loved her passion, he said. He'd invested in her first small firm, only to slowly, systematically absorb it into his own monolithic corporation, Thorne Properties. Her designs, which integrated green space and community centers, were quaint, but not profitable. Her work on modular, affordable housing was charity, not business. He'd gaslit her for 15 years, transforming her from a visionary architect into a high society hostess, a manager of guest lists and dinner menus. Now at 42, she was an ex-wife with a suppressed career and a name her husband had just publicly declared forgotten. She hailed a cab, the rain starting to slick the pavement, and gave the driver an address in Brooklyn. Not to a penthouse, but to a small fifth-floor walk-up she'd rented with the last of her private savings. As the cab crossed the bridge, the glittering Manhattan skyline, a skyline Richard was actively trying to own, mocked her. "He'd be forgotten," she whispered to the foggy window, tasting the salt of a single furious tear. "We'll see about that, Richard. We will see." The next 6 months were a brutal education in gravity. Leora's new life was a cramped studio in Greenpoint, the walls thin enough to hear her neighbors arguing over finances, a sound she'd never once heard on Park Avenue. Her friends from her former life evaporated. The calls stopped. The lunch invitations, which used to fill her calendar, were now replaced by automated rejection emails. "While your portfolio is impressive, Ms. Harris, we are looking for candidates with more recent project experience. We regret to inform you that the position has been filled." Richard's shadow was long. He hadn't just declared her forgotten. He was actively enforcing it. She heard through a former and brave assistant that Richard had put the word out: "Leora is emotional, unstable after the divorce, not ready for high-stakes projects." He was poisoning the well. He wasn't just letting her be forgotten, he was burying her alive. She was taking on freelance drafting work, designing kitchen renovations for dentists in New Jersey, anything to pay the bills. The paltry settlement was dwindling, most of it going to her lawyer. One rainy Tuesday, while digging through a box of old files she'd managed to rescue from her old life, a box she'd labeled "Do Not Touch" in bold red marker. Much to Richard's annoyance, she found it. It was a black, sleek external hard drive. On it was a single white label, Oasis. Her hands trembled. Oasis was her thesis, her masterpiece, the project she'd poured her soul into before Richard had ever entered the picture. It wasn't just a building, it was an ecosystem, a 2-block, self-sustaining micro-city. It combined residential units from luxury to subsidized vertical farms, a water reclamation plant that filtered gray water through cascading public gardens, and a central agora for community engagement. It was designed to be built in the shells of old industrial neighborhoods, breathing life back into urban decay. She plugged the drive into her aging laptop. The files were still there. The renderings, the physics calculations, the social integration matrices. It was beautiful. It was brilliant. And Richard had hated it. She remembered the night she showed it to him back when they were still new. He'd swirled his scotch and smiled that dismissive smile. "Leora, my love, it's adorable. A pipe dream for hippies. People don't want community. They want doormen. They want exclusivity. They want views. They don't want to look at a turnip farm growing on their wall." He told her to file it away, to focus on the real work, designing the opulent, sterile lobbies of his glass and steel coffins. A new potent anger burned through her despair. He hadn't just dismissed her work, he'd dismissed her soul. As if summoned by her anger, an ad popped up on her screen. "The Sterling Prize for Urban Innovation. $1,000 grand prize. Submit your vision for the city of tomorrow. Sterling," as in Damien Sterling. If Richard Thorne was the king of New York real estate, Damien Sterling was the ghost in the machine. He was a new money god, a tech billionaire who'd made his fortune in predictive AI and logistical algorithms before he was 30. He was a recluse known for funding impossible world-changing projects, atmospheric carbon capture, autonomous shipping fleets, and apparently urban innovation. He was also Richard Thorne's greatest obsession and least favorite topic. Richard saw him as an upstart, a coder, who didn't understand the concrete and blood of building a city. Damien, for his part, seemed to not see Richard at all. The deadline for the Sterling Prize was in 48 hours. Leora looked at her screen at the Oasis files. She looked around her tiny studio at the stack of unpaid bills. She thought about Richard's words: temporary scaffolding, forgotten. "Not today," she said to the empty room. For the next 47 hours she didn't sleep. She tore her old project apart. The core idea was sound, but the tech was 15 years old. She updated the materials, integrating new self-healing composites. She replaced her old solar models with new transparent photovoltaic glass. She rewrote the code for the AI-driven resource management using principles she'd only read about in Wired. She was no longer just a designer. She was a warrior. She was fueled by rage, cheap coffee, and the desperate primal need to prove to herself that she existed. With 10 minutes to spare, she hit submit. She collapsed onto her small cot, the laptop falling to the floor, and slept for the first time in 2 days, dreaming of cities that breathed. A week later, Leora was in the midst of designing a bathroom renovation for a poodle groomer when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again, insistently. She sighed and picked it up. Leora Harris. Ms. Harris, a crisp, British-accented voice said. This is Ariane Powell, Chief of Staff for Damien Sterling. Leora's heart stopped. She nearly dropped the phone. Yes. Mr. Sterling has reviewed your submission for the Innovation Prize, the Oasis. This was it. The rejection. She braced herself. I understand. It was a long shot. Mr. Sterling finds your central thesis intriguing, Ariane continued as if Leora hadn't spoken. He has some technical questions. He would like to meet with you. Meet like? A phone call. In person. At Sterling Tower. This afternoon. This afternoon? I'm in Brooklyn. I'm not dressed. Leora looked down at her paint-splattered jeans and old MIT sweatshirt. 2 p.m. A car is on its way to you now. It will be there in 20 minutes. The line clicked dead. The entire ride to Manhattan, Leora felt like she was going to be sick. Sterling Tower wasn't a building. It was a statement. It loomed over the Hudson, a sleek, twisting blade of black glass and green terraces that seemed to defy physics. It was the only new high-rise in New York that Richard Thorne hadn't been able to stop, and he hated it. The lobby was silent, futuristic. No opulent marble like Richard's buildings. Just polished concrete living green walls and the quiet hum of technology. Ariane Powell, a woman who looked like she could negotiate a hostile takeover before breakfast, met her at the elevator. They rode up in silence, not in a car, but in a high-speed magnetic lift that made Leora's ears pop. The office was at the very top. It was less an office and more a conservatory. A massive glass-domed atrium filled with trees and sunlight offering a 360-degree view of the city. And there, standing not at a desk but in front of a floor-to-ceiling transparent data screen, was Damien Sterling. He was not what she expected. He wasn't a polished CEO like Richard. He was young, perhaps in his late 30s, with an unruly mess of dark hair, a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked more like a grad student than a billionaire. He didn't turn around. Ms. Harris, he said, his voice quiet but resonant. He was still looking at the screen, which was displaying a 3D rotating wireframe of her Oasis project. Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing me. This is flawed, he said, tapping the screen. The model zoomed in on her water reclamation system. This filtration matrix, it's optimistic. The particulate load from a residential block this dense would overwhelm these algae scrubbers in 6 months. Leora bristled. The panic evaporated, replaced by the familiar fire of an academic defense. It's not flawed, Mr. Sterling. It's conditional, she shot back, stepping forward. The models are based on standard algae, yes. But if you integrate C. Reinhard Thai strains genetically modified for accelerated bioremediation, which I know your Sterling Bio division has been perfecting, the efficiency increases by 40%. The models hold. Damien finally turned. His eyes were a piercing, intelligent blue. He wasn't smiling, but there was a new energy in his gaze. He walked over to another part of the model. Your social integration matrix, he said, pointing. You're mixing luxury and subsidized units on the same floors. The industry standard which Thorne Properties perfected is pour doors. It's cynical, but it's profitable. Your model invites conflict. My model invites community, Leora countered, her voice rising. The industry standard is what creates urban blight. It creates us and them. My model uses shared central spaces, the gardens, the agora, the rooftop farms as mandatory interaction points. The exclusivity isn't in the door, it's in the idea. You don't live in Oasis to hide. You live there to participate. She was pacing now, energized. Richard, Mr. Thorne, he always said people want exclusivity. He's wrong. People are lonely. They're desperate for connection. They just haven't been given the infrastructure for it. Oasis isn't a building. It's a social algorithm written in concrete and light. She stopped breathless. Damian Sterling was silent for a full minute. He just watched her. He looked from her back to the screen, then back to her. Richard Thorne, Damian said, testing the name. You know him? It wasn't a question. He's my ex-husband. Leora said, her chin high. A flicker of something passed over Damian's face. Understanding pity. No, it was something harder. It was recognition. I see, he said. He walked back to the main screen and with a single gesture wiped her Oasis design from it. Leora's heart sank. She'd failed. She'd been too much, too argumentative. Richard's voice echoed in her head. You're too intense, Leora. You scare people. Mr. Sterling, The Sterling Prize is for concepts. Damian interrupted, turning to face her. We give $1 million to a charity or a university, we get a nice press release, and the idea dies in an academic paper. He gestured to the empty screen. Your project? Oasis. It's not a concept, Ms. Harris. It's a prototype. And you're right about the filtration. But you're wrong about the load-bearing calculations for the vertical farms. He tapped the screen and a new project appeared. It was massive. It was gorgeous. It was a city. This, he said, is Project Aegis, my division for New World infrastructure. I've been acquiring land for 2 years, a dead shipping yard in Red Hook. It's the perfect test site. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. You didn't win the prize, Ms. Harris. Oh, she said, her voice small. I'm dissolving the prize. It's a waste of time. I'm funding this instead. And it needs a chief architect. It needs someone who understands that a building isn't just a box, but a social algorithm. Someone who isn't afraid to argue with me. He extended a hand. I'm not offering you a prize, Leora Harris. I'm offering you a job. I'm offering you the chance to build the impossible. Leora looked at his outstretched hand. She looked at the city on the screen. She thought of Richard's scaffolding remark. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she walked to the screen and pointed. The load-bearing calculations are fine, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. If you're using steel, but if you use a laminated timber and graphene-reinforced core, you don't just get support, you get energy storage. Now, about my salary. Damian Sterling threw his head back and laughed. It was a surprising, joyous sound. Ariane, he called out, draw up a contract and find Ms. Harris the best damn engineering team we have. We have work to do. The next 3 months were a blur. Leora moved out of her Greenpoint studio and into a corporate apartment at her insistence, a modest one near the Sterling Tower. Her life, which had shrunk to the size of a single room, suddenly became infinite. Project Aegis was Damian's name, but Oasis was its heart. Leora wasn't just an employee. She was the visionary. Damian had given her a floor, a team of 20 of the world's brightest engineers, urban planners, and sociologists, and a budget that made her head spin. But it wasn't a blank check. It was a challenge. Damian Sterling didn't manage, he interrogated. Their days were a high-octane intellectual battle. The community agora is inefficient. He'd challenge pointing at the blueprint. The foot traffic to vendor ratio is off by 12%. That's because it's not a mall, Damian, she'd fire back, pulling up a social schematic. It's designed to slow people down. The inefficiency is the feature. It forces interaction. Then the interaction is forced. It's inorganic. It is structured, like a Japanese tea ceremony. We're providing the framework for a community that's forgotten how to build itself. He'd stare at the plans, his mind working at a speed she'd never seen in anyone else, and then nod a slow, appraising gesture. Fine, structure it. But if the tea ceremony costs me an extra $50 million, the tea better be damn good. This was their dynamic, a rapid-fire exchange of ideas, a partnership forged in argument and mutual respect. He was the quant, she was the qual. He was the algorithm, she was the soul. He pushed her on engineering and she pushed him on humanity. For the first time in 15 years, Leora felt seen. She wasn't Mrs. Thorne. She wasn't Richard's emotional ex. She was Ms. Harris, the chief architect of Project Aegis. She worked 18-hour days lost in material stress tests and social flow diagrams. She was exhausted, exhilarated, and terrifyingly happy. Meanwhile, the New York high society and real estate world began to notice. The first tremor was a small mention in the Gilded Post, the city's most ruthless gossip paper. The columnist Olivia Sharp was a known entity, a friend of Richard's. Spotted. Which forgotten Park Avenue princess has been seen flitting in and out of Sterling Tower? We hear the ice-cold tech titan Damian Sterling has a new protege. A pity project, perhaps? Or is she just designing his new doghouse? Leora read it and her blood ran cold. But Damian, when she showed it to him, just shrugged. Does it stop the concrete from curing? He asked, not looking up from a holographic model. No, but... Then it doesn't matter. Get back to work, Harris. Your solar array is underperforming. But Richard Thorne wasn't just a gossip monger. He was a shark who'd smelled blood. And that blood was in Red Hook. Richard had been trying to acquire the same dead shipping yard for years. He wanted to build Thorne Landing, a complex of luxury high-rises that would block out the sun and price out the neighborhood. But he'd been blockaded at every turn by an anonymous holding company that kept outbidding him. Now he knew who it was. Damian Sterling. And in a twist that must have sent Richard into a narcissistic rage, the person designing the project was the ex-wife he'd sworn no one would remember. The smear campaign began in earnest. It was no longer just gossip. It was a professional assassination. Olivia Sharp's column became a weekly anti-Leora newsletter. Thorne's ex a Cinder Leora story or a gold-digging gambit. Sources close to Thorne Properties say Leora Harris was let go from her hobby firm years ago due to instability and wildly impractical designs. Her Oasis project was reportedly a failed college paper. Now she's attached herself to Damian Sterling. One has to wonder what this visionary architect is really offering the reclusive billionaire. And it's probably not her blueprints. The article was vile. It implied everything while saying nothing. Leora felt the old shame, the gaslighting, creep back in. She stormed into Damian's office, the tablet in her hand. "You have to make a statement," she said, her voice shaking. "You have to tell them this is a lie. They're calling me a prostitute." Damian put down his stylus and gave her his full attention. His face was cold still. "Do you care what Richard Thorne thinks?" he asked. "I care what my team thinks. I care what your board thinks. This is designed to make me toxic, to make you drop me." "Richard," Damian said, "is a bulldozer. He knows one move flatten everything in his path. He thinks if he flattens you, I'll be exposed. He thinks I'm using you to get at him." "Are you?" Leora asked, the question hanging in the air. Damian stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city. "Richard and I have been on a collision course for a decade. He builds monuments to ego. I build systems. He wants to own the city. I want to change it. This isn't about him, Leora. It's about the work." "But he's making the work impossible." "No," Damian said, turning back to her. "He's making it necessary. He's reminding us why we're doing this. To beat men like him. To build something that lasts longer than his jealousy." He picked up his phone. "Ariane, cancel my meeting with the Tokyo Fund and clear my schedule. Ms. Harris and I are going dark. We're going to the site." For the next month, they disappeared. They worked not from the tower, but from a shipping container on the windy, desolate Red Hook site. They refined every detail, argued over every bolt, and redesigned the entire project from the ground up, making it stronger, smarter, and more revolutionary. They also, in the quiet hours of the night, started talking about more than just work. He told her about his childhood, a foster kid who taught himself to code. She told him about her dreams, the ones she'd buried under her marriage. One night over cold pizza, he looked at her, his eyes serious. "He didn't just sideline you, Leora. He was afraid of you. Your work. It's better than his. It's always been better." It was the first time she truly believed it. When they emerged, it was with a finalized Project Aegis that wasn't just innovative. It was a declaration of war. The rumor mill had gone quiet. Too quiet. Leora's absence, coupled with Damien's, had created a vacuum in the New York gossip sphere. Richard Thorne, meanwhile, had taken the silence as a victory. He interpreted their going dark as a retreat. He assumed Damien had finally seen the wisdom in his warnings and had sidelined the unstable ex-wife. Richard, feeling magnanimous in his victory, doubled down. He fast-tracked the announcement for his own rival project, Thorne Resurgence. A gleaming, soulless tower he planned to build right on the edge of the financial district. He secured a major spread in Forbes, proclaiming him the king of the New York comeback. In the article he was quoted, "The future isn't in idealistic community-based fantasies. It's in bold, powerful statements. People want strength. They want a leader, not a committee. This is the new age of the New York Empire." It was a direct shot at Damien's collaborative, community-focused ethos. Leora read the article in the back of a town car, her stomach in knots. She was on her way to the Global Innovator Summit, a massive Davos-like event where the biggest names in tech, finance, and culture converged. "He's baiting you, you know," she said to Damien, who sat beside her scrolling through data on a tablet. "It's not bait," Damien replied, not looking up. "It's a eulogy. He's memorializing an era that's already dead. He's going to be there, front row." "I know. Ariane arranged it." Leora's head snapped up. "You invited him." "He invited himself, but Ariane made sure his seats were optimal for visibility." A ghost of a smile played on Damien's lips. "He thinks today is my keynote on AI algorithms. He's coming to see the coder play with his toys." "And what is today's keynote about?" Leora asked, adjusting the sleeve of her simple, powerfully tailored Armani pantsuit. It was the first time in her life she'd worn armor that wasn't a dress. "Today," Damien said, finally looking at her, his blue eyes locking with hers. "Today is about architecture, the architecture of the future." The auditorium was packed, thousands of investors, journalists, and tech moguls. And just as Damien had predicted, there in the center of the front row was Richard Thorne. He was in his element, holding court, his arm draped around Isabella Vance, who looked bored and beautiful. Richard gave Leora a small, pitying nod as she and Damien were escorted to their seats. It was the nod of a king to a former courtier. "Look at you," the nod said, still carrying the briefcase, still the assistant. Leora's hands clenched, but Damien's hand lightly brushed her elbow, a silent wait. The lights went down. The summit moderator walked on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker needs no introduction. He is the man who has redefined predictive AI logistics and bioengineering. Please welcome Damien Sterling." Damien walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He stood at the center, not behind the podium, but in the open. He looked relaxed in his element. "Thank you," he began, his voice filling the hall. "We're here to talk about innovation. But for the last 20 years, innovation has been a digital concept. We've built empires in the cloud. We've built worlds inside our phones. But the world we actually live in," he gestured, and the massive screen behind him lit up not with code but with images of bleak, sterile cityscapes. Glass towers, empty plazas, the homeless huddled in the shadows of multi-million-dollar condos. "The world we live in is failing. We've been sold a lie. That progress means privatization. that community is inefficient, that the only purpose of a skyline is to show off wealth. In the front row, Richard Thorne, who had been checking his phone, looked up. His smile faltered. This was not a speech about AI. We've been led by men who build monuments to their own egos. Damien continued, his voice growing stronger. Men who see concrete and steel as weapons of acquisition. Men who build poor doors and call it market segmentation. Men who value a view more than a vision. A low murmur went through the crowd. This was an ambush. These men, Damien said, his gaze sweeping the front row, call themselves architects of the future, but they are just temporary scaffolding. Leora gasped. He was using Richard's own word. Richard Thorne's face went white. He knew in that instant that this was not a keynote. It was an execution. Isabella had visibly leaned away from him. Sterling Industries, Damien announced, is today launching a new division, Project Aegis, a multi-billion-dollar initiative to build the city of tomorrow today, a city built on sustainability, community, and human connection. We are building the first prototype in Red Hook. The screen behind him erupted with the Oasis renderings. Not the old academic ones, but the new, breathtaking, fully realized designs. The vertical farms, the sunlit agoras, the cascading water gardens. The crowd collectively oohed. This is not a concept, Damien said. The ground is being broken as we speak. But I am not the visionary here. I am just the engineer. The architect of this revolution is someone who has been told her ideas were pipe dreams. Someone who was told she would be forgotten. He turned his gaze, finding Leora in the wings where she'd moved. It is my absolute honor to introduce the woman who designed this entire future, the chief architect of Project Aegis, and my future partner, Ms. Leora Harris. The silence in the auditorium was absolute, a perfect crystalline vacuum. It lasted for 1 second, 2, then 3. My future partner, Ms. Leora Harris. The words echoed, amplified. Partner. Richard Thorne looked as if he'd been physically struck. His mouth was open, his face a mask of puce, incredulous rage. The Champagne King of New York had just been checkmated by a tech geek and the scaffolding he'd thrown away. The spotlight hit Leora where she stood in the wings. For a paralyzing moment, she was back at the Met in the shadow of the column, hearing those words. Forgotten. Damien was looking at her not with a command but with an invitation. His hand was outstretched. Leora took a breath. She smoothed the front of her jacket. She thought of her tiny Brooklyn apartment, of the rejection emails, of the condescending smile Richard had given her just 10 minutes ago. She walked out of the shadows and into the light. She didn't look at Richard. She didn't look at the gasping crowd. She walked directly to Damien Sterling, a small, confident smile on her face. She did not take his outstretched hand. Instead, she stood beside him as an equal. The auditorium exploded. The applause was deafening. It wasn't just applause. It was a release. The investors seeing the future of urban development. The journalists sensing the biggest business and drama story of the year. The tech crowd seeing their digital-first leader make a massive, unprecedented move into the physical world. Leora stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you, Damien," she said, her voice clear and strong, not a tremor in it. "Mr. Sterling is right about one thing. We have been sold a lie about how we are supposed to live." She clicked a remote and a new rendering appeared, a cross-section of the water reclamation system, the C. Reinhardti strains working their magic. For too long, profit and community have been treated as opposing forces. Oasis is not a charity project. It is the single most profitable, sustainable, and scalable urban model ever designed. She was brilliant. She was in her element. She didn't talk about her divorce. She didn't talk about Richard. She talked about material stress, photovoltaic efficiency, and the social ROI of shared public spaces. She was not a victim. She was a visionary. For 20 minutes she held them spellbound. She took their unformed anxieties about loneliness, climate change, and urban decay, and she gave them a blueprint for the solution. When she finished, there was a beat of silence, and then the entire auditorium rose to its feet. A standing ovation. Damian Sterling stood beside her, clapping his eyes, never leaving her face. In the front row, the seats were empty. Richard and Isabella were gone, having slipped out during the technical specifications, their retreat a stark admission of defeat. The aftermath was immediate. The clip of Damian's speech, the cut to Richard's horrified face, and Leora's triumphant walk to the stage went viral before the summit even concluded. The Ghost and the Architect, Damian Sterling, announces Project Aegis with future partner Leora Harris. Richard Thorne's forgotten wife set to redesign New York. King Richard deposed how a tech billionaire and a visionary architect ended the Thorne dynasty. Olivia Sharp's Gilded Post column was conspicuously silent. Leora's inbox, which had been a digital graveyard, flooded with thousands of emails. Old colleagues apologizing. Classmates from MIT cheering. Young female architects from around the world calling her an inspiration. The word partner was the talk of the town. Was it business? Was it personal? The ambiguity was its power. To the business world, it meant she was an equity-holding partner in the most valuable new venture of the decade. To the social world, it meant more. Richard hadn't just lost his ex-wife. He'd lost her to his greatest rival. He hadn't just been beaten. He'd been replaced. That evening at the exclusive post-summit reception, Leora was surrounded. Investors, mayors, venture capitalists, all vying for a moment of her time. Richard Thorne tried one last desperate gambit. He cornered Leora by the terrace, his face a mottled red, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "This is a joke, Leora," he spat, grabbing her arm. This boy, he's using you. He's a child playing with blocks. You'll come crawling back to me when his oasis fantasy dries up." "Let go of me, Richard," Leora said, her voice dangerously calm. She didn't try to pull away. "I made you," he hissed. "You were nothing. You'll be nothing again. You told everyone I'd be forgotten." Leora looked down at his hand on her arm, then back to his face. "And you were right in a way. The woman you knew, the one who believed your lies, the one who let you call her work a hobby, she is forgotten. She's gone. You erased her." She leaned in, her voice dropping. "And you should be terrified of the woman who's left." "Ms. Harris." Damian's voice cut through the air. He was standing right behind Richard, flanked by two very large, very calm security guards. "Is there a problem?" Richard dropped his hand from her arm as if it were on fire. He looked from Leora's cold fury to Damian's colder indifference. He was a lion, yes, but this was not his jungle. He was an animal in a cage, and the walls were closing in. Without a word, Richard Thorne turned, and for the first time in his life, he retreated. Leora watched him go, a small, sad figure disappearing into the crowd he used to own. She turned to Damian. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Damian replied. He offered her a glass of champagne. "But I've been wanting to do that for a while." He raised his glass. "To our future partner, Ship," he said, the small smile returning. "Aegis is going to take us a decade at least," he said, his tone shifting from public to private. "That's a partnership, and I don't partner with people I don't intend to keep." Leora clinked her glass against his. "To the work, Damian." "To the work." He agreed, but his eyes said something more. The fall of Richard Thorne was not a sudden cinematic explosion. It was a slow, agonizing bleed, a death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one delivered by the market he claimed to command. His Thorne Resurgence project, the monument he had staked his name on, became a public joke. After the summit, Resurgence sounded less like a comeback and more like a desperate plea. His primary investors, a consortium of international bankers who cared for nothing but the path of least resistance to profit, began to pull their financing. They didn't call Richard personally. They had their people send sterile, legal-heavy emails. The message was clear: your brand is toxic. We're moving our capital to the Aegis model. Forbes, the same magazine that had crowned him king, ran a follow-up piece titled "The Scaffolding King: How Ego Toppled an Empire." Even Olivia Sharp, the Gilded Post columnist who had been his loyal attack dog, turned on him. Seeing which way the wind was blowing, she wrote a scathing eulogy for his career, painting him as a relic, a dinosaur of development who couldn't adapt. She praised with sickening, sycophantic zeal the breathtaking, human-centric vision of Lyora Harris. The final personal humiliation came not from the market, but from the merger. Isabella Vance arrived at his office not in tears, but in a crisp, steel-gray business suit, her father's lawyer in tow. She placed the offensively large engagement ring on his desk. "The terms of our family's prenuptial merger," she said, her voice as cool as the diamond she was abandoning, "were contingent on a brand synergy that is no longer viable." "This is a temporary setback, Isabella." Richard had blustered, the old roar sounding more like a wheeze. "This is a paradigm shift, Richard," she corrected him, picking a piece of lint from her sleeve. "And you are on the wrong side of it. The Vance family is officially exploring a partnership with Sterling's Aegis initiative. Good luck with your resurgence." But the true execution, the public guillotining, happened at City Hall. The Red Hook waterfront contract was up for its final vote. Richard, looking haggard and visibly smaller in his bespoke suit, made a desperate, rambling presentation based on tax revenue and exclusive luxury. He sounded like a man from another century. Then Lyora and Damien took the floor. They didn't talk about luxury, they talked about life. They presented hard data on air quality, community health, and long-term economic stability. Lyora, in a striking midnight blue dress, the same color she'd worn when she was invisible at the Met, spoke with a passion and precision that was mesmerizing. She wasn't just building a complex, she was solving a city's problems. The city council's vote was unanimous. The Thorne proposal was rejected. The Project Aegis master plan was approved. The cameras zoomed in on Richard Thorne's face as he sat frozen. A man turned to stone while the room erupted in applause for the woman he swore would be forgotten. 1 year later, Lyora stood on the rooftop terrace of the first completed Aegis module. It was no longer a blueprint. It was real. The air up here was different. It was soft, carrying the scent of lavender and thyme from the massive planters that lined the roof, not the usual New York miasma of exhaust and hot pavement. Below her, the central agora was bustling. It was 5:00 p.m. and the space was flooded with life. She watched a group of children run laughing from the community daycare toward the central fountain, which cascaded with the building's own reclaimed and purified water. Residents, a mix of artists, bankers, young families, and seniors, just as she'd designed, mingled at a farmer's market, buying produce grown in the vertical farms that made up the tower's southern face. The sound wasn't the shriek of traffic. It was the hum of 1,000 small, connected lives. It was alive. It was breathing. It was hers. The heavy door to the roof opened with a soft, hydraulic sigh. Damien stepped out, a blueprint roll tucked under his arm. He'd traded his t-shirts for more architect-friendly button-downs, but his hair was still an unruly mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it all day. "The air quality sensors on level 12 are reading 15% cleaner than the simulations predicted," he said, foregoing a hello. That was their hello. "Your algae is overperforming. The bioremediation matrix is too efficient." "I told you the C. Reinhardti strains would work," Lyora said, smiling. She leaned back against the railing, looking out over the new skyline they were building together. Their building was a living green heart amidst the cold glass and steel canyons. "It's nice to be right." "It's expensive to be that right," he countered, but the smile in his eyes gave him away. "The accelerated growth means we have to adjust the harvesting schedule for the biomass converters." "A good problem to have," she mused. He came to stand beside her, not too close, but in her space, their shoulders almost touching. They looked out over the city. So Damien said, his voice shifting from professional to something else. I just got off the phone with the City of London. They want one. Right on the Thames. Paris wants to replace a defunct industrial park in the 13th. And Singapore? Singapore wants to build 3. We'll be busy, Leora said, a quiet thrill running through her. For the rest of our lives, probably, he said. He was quiet for a full minute, just watching the sunset reflect off the photovoltaic glass of their own creation. The silence between them was comfortable, charged with a year of shared 18-hour days of arguments over structural steel and of victories celebrated with bad takeout on messy blueprints. You know, he said, his voice softer, I've been thinking about the summit that day. Leora turned to look at him. It's hard to forget. That was a high-risk maneuver, he said almost to himself, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Future partner. It was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. Leora's heart did a strange, slow roll. She'd spent a year analyzing that word. It had been her shield, her reintroduction to the world. It had been her armor. I knew what Richard had said about you, Damien continued, finally turning to meet her gaze. I'd read every article. I'd seen the scaffolding quote. He was trying to define you as a temporary attachment to him. He was erasing you. He stepped closer. I couldn't let that stand. But a simple press release, a Sterling Industries is proud to hire, wouldn't have worked. It would have been a footnote. He would have spun it as me picking up his cast-offs. I had to do something. Seismic. I had to rebrand you in the public eye in a single sentence. I had to sever Thorne from Harris with a sword. So you used partner, she said, her voice quiet. I used partner, he confirmed. I needed the world to know in no uncertain terms that you were not his forgotten anything. You were mine, professionally speaking. Professionally speaking, she repeated, a small smile playing on her lips. It was the most ruthless, brilliant, and arrogant PR move I've ever seen. You didn't even ask me. No, I didn't. He admitted, a rare flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. It was a presumption. I was betting on the fact that you, the architect who designed this, he swept his hand toward the living building around them, would understand that sometimes you have to tear down the old foundation to build something true. She had understood. In that moment on stage, she had understood everything. But, he continued, and his voice dropped lower, it's been a year, Leora. A year of this. The project is stable. The world is convinced. London can wait. Paris can wait. And I am, as you frequently pointed out, not a patient man. Not about the things I truly actually want. He took her hand. It wasn't a grab like Richard's had been, a gesture of ownership. It was a question, his fingers lightly, respectfully entangling with hers. I don't just want to build cities with you, Leora Harris, he said, his blue eyes intense and completely terrifyingly sincere. That's the business partnership. And it's the best one I've ever had. I respect your mind more than anyone I've ever met. Damien. But I'm also interested in the other definition of partner. The one the gossip columns were hoping for. The one Richard was terrified of. He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. I'm a data-driven man, Leora. And all the data, every piece of it, points to this. To you. Leora looked at this brilliant, intense, impossible man. The man who hadn't saved her. He hadn't been a knight in shining armor. He had been a mirror showing her the strength that was already there. He had given her the tools, the budget, and the respect to save herself. Richard had wanted to own her. Damien was asking to stand beside her. Damien, she said, her voice full and strong, her fingers tightening around his. What if I told you the social algorithm for Oasis was never just about the residents? What if I told you it was always designed for a partnership of two? He smiled, a true, rare, brilliant smile that reached his eyes and made him look for a second like a different person. I'd say I'm a man who trusts the architect. And what if I told you? She continued stepping closer, closing the last bit of space between them. That after a year of working with you, of arguing with you, of building this, that you are the only variable I'm no longer willing to run the simulations without. Lyora. He breathed, his other hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Show me the blueprint, Damien, she whispered. And he did. He kissed her not with the desperate claiming hunger of a man like Richard, but with the quiet, profound certainty of a man who has finally solved the most complex equation of his life. It was a kiss of mutual respect, of shared victories, of 18-hour days and cold coffee. It was a kiss that felt like a foundation. As the sun set, casting long golden shadows across their city, Lyora Harris, the woman who was supposed to be forgotten, pulled back and rested her forehead against his. She was the architect, he was the engineer, and together they looked out at the future they were building. And for the first time the blueprint was perfectly, completely clear. The perfect revenge isn't just success. It's becoming undeniable. Lyora's story shows that your greatest work, your true calling, often comes right after your greatest setback. She wasn't just scaffolding for someone else's life. She was the architect of her own. What did you think of Richard's downfall? Was Damien's move at the summit pure business, or was it the most epic romantic gesture of all time? Let me know your favorite part of the story in the comments below. And if you love stories about impossible comebacks, getting that second chance and proving everyone wrong, please do me a huge favor, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You don't want to miss the next story. Trust me, the drama is just getting started.
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. It's all signed Emma, he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller, The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them. Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. Where am I supposed to go, Julian? She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent. He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. I will. Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. You know, I almost feel sorry for you, he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone. He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, Sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. "No one will ever want you." It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge. I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible. Too bad, Chloe countered. Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him. Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. You will die alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Okay, I'll go. Chloe's smile was triumphant. That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. Stop hiding behind the ficus, Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. You look like a goddess. Own it. They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. I need some air, she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas? The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. Yes, Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, it's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture. The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. Most people just see the ballerina. He set his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting? "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. "For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina." Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive, as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. "Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now." With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago, standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she? Gold digger alert. Poor Julian. He's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. "Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster." Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. "Don't read that garbage," she ordered. "I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release." Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. "Oh, honey." She enveloped Emma in a hug. "Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe, Emma croaked. Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did. Chloe said, her voice steely. This is his playbook. Control the narrative. Isolate the target. Publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator. Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. Don't answer it, she whispered. It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support, Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. Who is it? A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. It's Alistair Sterling. For Emma Vance. Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. Let him in, Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in. In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. Miss Vance. Emma, he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. I know this is an intrusion. May I come in? She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. I came to apologize, he said, turning back to her. My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that. It's not your fault, Emma said, finding her voice. It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours. Alistair countered, and I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here. He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. This is for you. She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone, he explained. Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe. Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. I also saw his statement. Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen. Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming. Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms. He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence. A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. He built his entire empire on my work. The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. What do you mean, his book? Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. He didn't just steal my words, she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity. Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. He won't get away with it, Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. Now, we need to choose our moment. The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. It's perfect, Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down, Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. I can't just walk in and accuse him. You won't have to, Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds. The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy. Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process. Julian preened. It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul. Interesting, Sarah said, looking down at her notes. Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, to be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality. A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, the Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality. A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy. Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. I am not a victim or a gold digger, the statement read. I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of the architect of you were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out. The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of you was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorne fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team A phalanx of New York's sharpest minds, funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work." Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear and infinite with promise, and it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential. If this story of resilience, justice, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the most incredible real-life dramas. What did you think of Julian's takedown? Let me know in the comments below.